Welcome to the first lesson of Module 5, which is the character drawing workflows. In this particular lesson, we're going to be discussing the rough and refined stages when drawing characters. And let me say up front that both this module and this lesson are very, very important. It's very important, particularly, that you grasp these two stages, the rough and refined stages. And we'll go into it in a moment. This entire module covers the character drawing workflow or workflows, how we implement our theory into producing a nice finished piece of work. Now, Module 6 has a lot of additional and crucial character design theory. So you might want to do Module 5, go to Module 6, and then come back to Module 5 again, and then understand how to add in all those additional theories, right? Drawing workflows, general global art workflows, painting workflows, they all generally offer a similar theme. And that theme is these two stages of rough and refined. Another way to understand this is that we want to see our two global stages, our big kind of breakdown stages, as one being the construction stage and the other one being the rendering stage. Or another stage being, or another way to put it, a planning phase and then an implementing phase. Or another way to put it again would be planning the drawing and then drawing the drawing, right? It may sound ridiculous. Don't you just sit down and draw something amazing? Well, no, not really. Perhaps when you're very experienced, you're able to do that. But we need to implement theory in some kind of logical ordering, right? And we need to build drawings up in some kind of logical way, as you've seen where we've been working and talking about things like shape and form and detail. All right, so let's take a look at some examples. I've got two examples here. And on the left-hand side, we see the construction of the drawing, and I'm particularly messy in my construction. So you can see the construction of this portrait drawing here, and then the final drawing, which itself is not super neat, but it's relatively fine, and it's got kind of a bit of a roughish, sort of traditional kind of look to it. All right. And you might think to yourself, well, how on earth is it possible to go from this to this? And we'll get into that. Here is another example, which is a elf character, and this was the construction drawing, and literally I did the construction drawing, I put a layer on top, and I immediately drew this on the right. And once again, you might feel like, well, there seems to be some kind of gap in the knowledge. How did you draw, her armor and her cloth? How did you think of the details for those things? Why is there no planning for those sort of minute details? And, look how crazy and messy this is. How do you go from this messiness to this neatness? And we'll go into that more in detail as we move through this module. However, just understand that this is completely and absolutely possible, and it's about mindset, which we're going to talk about just now. It's all about mindset. When you're doing construction and planning, you are in one mindset. When you're doing refined lines and cleaning and finishing up your drawing, you're in another mindset. And a good example for this that I want to bring to the table is an analogy of cooking. So something I find with my students, before we get into the analogy, is that they tend to try to be neat and clean and all super detailed, and they're so worried that their work isn't going to look good, so they're trying to be all neat in every phase. So they're planning neatly, and they're trying to draw the volumes neatly, and everything's super neat, and it ends up making this really terrible drawing at the end of the day that's really tight and lifeless, and the planning hasn't been well thought out because they couldn't plan properly because they were so worried about it looking good. Let's go to the cooking analogy. Think about it. Is a kitchen that has got chefs in it super clean and super neat? I mean, obviously clean in terms of health, but I mean, it's not a neat place. There's food everywhere. There's plates everywhere, there's cooking utensils, oil splashing, people are frying up things, there's flour scattered about, and all the bits and pieces of the food that they're making. However, when you're at the restaurant and you order the meal, and the meal comes to you, it comes to you on a beautiful plate. Hopefully, let's talk about a high-end restaurant here. It's clean, it's neat, you're served well, the food is on the plate, it looks delicious, it's cooked well, it's wonderful. But that wonderful food and its presentation is only really a product of the planning that happened in the kitchen and the understanding of the ingredients and the cooking temperatures and adding all those various things together, right? And so the kitchen is a messy place. It's messy, it's untidy. Perhaps it's not as untidy in a metaphorical sense as my left drawing here. But that depends on the kind of person you are. As long as you know you're planning well and you know that you're not looking for good looks in your rough, right? Because you'll get to the good looks in the refined stage. The analogy points to that you need to be loose, right? We've talked about looseness and being loose in your lines and what tight lines do and what loose lines do, all right? And so how we want to think about this is that the rough stage is our planning stage, right? Or the planning of the drawing is literally the planning of the drawing, right? It's the foundations of the drawing. Weak foundations on the left mean a weak drawing on the right. Strong foundations on the left mean a strong drawing on the right, okay? So you have to understand this is a planning phase, and in this phase, right, phase one, let's just call it phase one, the rough stage / the planning stage / the construction phase, we are building foundations. And so your mindset here, let's say, is much more academic. Your mindset is, how do I need to implement the theory? How can I ensure asymmetric shapes? How can I ensure there are opposing curves and no parallels, etc., etc., etc.? And we're applying the theory and we're building the forms and we're adding dynamism and we're worrying about shapes and we're worrying about all the fundamental stuff, but we don't worry about the finishing or the details, okay? And it is a creative phase, but it's more of a construction creative phase. So you're being creative in a constructive sense in your rough phase or your planning phase on the left. And when you get to the right, this is the time where you can have that loose freedom and creativity that you kind of see in movies where they're just drawing amazing things. This phase, once you've got the strong construction, you draw on top of the strong construction a new layer or a new page or what have you. And now, because your foundations are so strong, you actually are free within the restrictions you've set for yourself in the foundation. You're quite free to do as you wish and to line weight and detail as you wish, because things on the left are in their right place, in their right location, at their right size, with all the right theories implemented, and you know what's in front and what's behind, and things are foreshortening and overlapping, and there's line overlaps, and all that jazz is happening on the left. And on the right, you are free to be creative and loose, and definitely the most fun phase is on the right. And usually, the irony is that the planning actually takes a shorter amount of time to do, and the refined takes longer, but the planning is harder to do, right? The planning on the left is harder to do because it requires all the bulk of our theory. And then the right side, the refining, is not that hard to do. It just takes a longer time because you want to get those lines nice, and you think about the line weights, and you're adding little details, all right? But they're really incidental. You make them up a lot of the times on the spot. Okay. Now, once again, I know that you're thinking to yourself, well, there still seems to be a huge gap in my knowledge. And once again, I'll say we will get there, because as beginners, you will need to move beyond just 2 stages. But you need to understand that this is where we want to get to. We want to get to 2 stages, but we're going to break these down into a few more stages as we move on. All right, so another analogy that I want to give you is the idea of a building construction site. So imagine if they are doing a beautiful skyscraper in the middle of the city. That construction site does not look beautiful. There are trucks and machines everywhere, concrete everywhere, reinforced steel bars, workers that are filthy, because they're dealing with sand and stone and drilling and screwing things in and doing all the kind of stuff that they do on a construction site. The reason I'm being so emphatic about this is that while you may think you get it, it depends who you are, you might get it. From my experience, generally speaking, I have to be super clear, super emphatic. It is so important that you are absolutely rough and loose and focusing only on implementing theory in your rough stage. Don't worry about looks, don't worry about beauty, don't worry about appeal per se. Just use the theories of how we're getting appeal, the theories of how we're building forms, the theories of dynamism, the theories of line weights, the theories of the composition and stuff like that, right? And that's why module 6 is important, because it's going to add tons of theories. It's really the golden module. But just understand that that is our construction site. We must have a construction site, and we must be free and loose to build, right? And then when we move to the refined stage, now we can add glass and decide on the furniture in the building and what paintings we're going to put in the foyer and all that jazz, right? So you can see that it's much more of a meaningless stage in terms of theory and getting things right, the refined stage. But of course, the refined stage is important as well. You need both stages to get a good drawing. Okay, so I want to be emphatic, and I want to say to you guys, please remember this. Remember these stages. strive for these stages, go crazy in the rough stage, get things right according to the theory, and then be free in the refined stage. You can be more creative and more loose in the refined stage to get that refined drawing out. All right, we are going to break these down into smaller stages, which you'll learn to combine into these two in the next few lessons. So let's move on to those lessons, and I'll see you there.